story. Do it again.
It's good. It's good. Baruch Hashem. Okay, Chavra, we left off last week with a question. The shadow that we asked at the end of last week was, why do we celebrate Hanukkah? Meaning, yes, it's true that there was a victory and we won a war and there was a miracle that oil lasted for 8 days. Pashtus is that the fact that we celebrate Hanukkah is somewhat of a mystery, meaning it's out of the ordinary. And just to emphasize this question here, we had many Yom Tovim of victories, of all sorts of things that happened in the times of the second Beis Hamikdash. We celebrate none of them. None of those things. And the reason would be fairly obvious. And this is what the Rambam told us. The Rambam told us that that the story of Hanukkah, we'll just see it inside. B'Bai Sheni, in the days of the second Beis Hamikdash, Shemalchu Yavan, during the times of the kingdom of the empire of Greece, Gazru Gezerius al Yisrael, they ruled many edicts against the Jewish people. Ubitlu datam, and they nullified our religion. And they didn't let us do Torah and mitzvahs. That's the story of Hanukkah that everybody tells you in kindergarten, right? That the Greeks wouldn't let us do Torah and mitzvahs. And there's a famous Levush. The Levush asks the question why it is that Hanukkah we celebrate with oil versus meaning spiritual things, light and Torah and singing and Hallel and Haggah, which we'll get to in a few minutes. And Purim we celebrate with physical things, Mishlach Manos, Matanos Levyanim. And the Levush writes that Mordechai Yafa, the author of the Levush in Shulchan Aruch, he says because Hanukkah time they were fighting against our religion, and Purim they were fighting against our bodies. So we hit back in corresponding ways. But the Rambam doesn't seem to be so much in line with that, because the Rambam points out that it wasn't just that they were trying to get rid of our religion. Says the Rambam, Upashtu yodam b'mamoinam, they stretched out their hands against our money. They tried to steal our money, meaning the goal of the Greek Empire was to turn Judea into a vassal, to make it a taxed state, to claim all of the Jewish money. Ubibnoisehem, and our daughters, meaning they were kidnapping Jewish girls and doing what they wanted to do with them. Meaning it wasn't just that they hated our religion, they hated us. That was part of it. It wasn't just that they were intolerant about our religion. They did things to actively discourage Jewish continuity. Not just religious continuity, the Jewish people. V'nichnasu laheichal, and they entered into the heichal, meaning the Beis Hamikdash. Upartzu by pirtzus, and they broke things. Keep that in mind. Partzu by pirtzus, they broke things. They lifrutz means literally to make a gap. And we'll get to that in a few minutes, because there is a mitzvah of Hanukkah that we do not observe today because we no longer have the Beis Hamikdash. And you're going to say, but Rabbi, what specific mitzvah existed with Hanukkah in the Beis Hamikdash that we don't have today? We'll get there. So v'timu taras, and they made pure things impure. That seems to be intentional, that they specifically made things impure. They wanted to make things impure, which is strange, because why would they care? Like, I understand that they don't like Jews, and they are taking Jewish money, and they are raping Jewish girls. That's standard fare of anti-Semites. That they are coming to the Beis Hamikdash and breaking things, okay, but v'timu hataras, they made things that were pure impure. Like that was...
Because that would break up.
Okay, but like that's a very sophisticated anti-Semitism. Now the Greeks were sophisticated people, but it seems to be that is a big theme about Hanukkah in general, is the concept of v'timu hataras, right? We point this out a few times. Right? So we point out a number of pieces of the story, but v'timu kol hashmanim, that they made the oils impure. Were it not for this Rambam, I might have thought that this was something that it just happened incidentally, right? That they made things impure. And in kindergarten, the story that they tell you is that they were looking for a jar of oil that was sealed with the seal of the Kohen Gadol, right? Which is true, but it's a little bit peculiar because, what was the problem with the other ones? You need to have a seal of the Kohen Gadol in order to use the oil? No. All the oil could be used. What was the problem was that they intentionally impurified things. They made things that were tahor tameh. So in order to find something that wasn't tameh, you had to find something that was sealed, because otherwise it would have had tumah involved in it. And then there's an interesting question, which is, where did the tumah come from? That's another peculiarity.
In other words, what did they do to be matame the oil?
Right. How were they matame the oil?
Just by touching it. Yeah. Is it like this is live stream?
Yeah.
Someone's in the.
So how are they matame the oil? So it's an interesting shaila in halacha. How do you contract tumah?
Mate.
So you could have a mace. What, they took a dead person in there and they. So.
There's also bodily impurities. There's a lot of.
So here's the interesting thing is that there are many different kinds of tumah that exist that fall into two broad categories. There's what's called, there's 11 different kinds of tumah, but that's how the Rambam counts at the beginning of Hilchos Taharos. But at the beginning of Seder Taharos in the Mishnah, there are two broad categories. There's tumah hayotze alav migufa and tumah haba alav mivachutz. Tumah hayotze alav migufa is the tumah that comes from inside of a body, which is zav, zava, nida, yoledes, balkari. Right? Zav and zava are emissions that come from male and female sexual organs. Nida is menstruation. Yoledes is giving birth. Balkari is from male sexual interactions. Meaning those processes, if a person has one of those things that come out of them, they become impure, and the liquid is also impure. Meaning the stuff that comes out is also impure. Those are tumah hayotze meguf, tumah that comes from inside of a person. And then there's tumah haba alav mibachutz, tumah that comes from outside, which is from a mace or a tameh mace, or meaning somebody that comes in contact with the dead body is also an avha tumah that can create ritual impurity, as well as a nevela can also create impurity, as well as the dead sheretz, a dead creepy crawly can also create impurity. But here's the interesting thing: a non-Jew cannot become impure. Hilchos tumah and tahara don't apply to goyim. Meaning a non-Jew doesn't contract tumah. It's only a halacha that applies to Jews. Which means one of two things. Either the tumah that the Greek Hellenists introduced into the Beis Hamikdash was some object that they brought in, a dead creepy crawly or something, in order to be matame. Or the people that were matame were not Greeks, they were Jews. Which is another strong possibility. Meaning, together with the Greeks fighting against the Hashmonaim were Jewish Hellenists that had defected and become Greek. And that's part of the dark underbelly of the story of Chanuka, is that you're talking about a society where a lot of people were on different sides of this thing. It wasn't 100% clear that everybody was pro-Hashmonai. Let's understand for a moment that, practically speaking, historically speaking, the majority of Judea at that point in time was Greek. I mean, they were Hellenists. They were part of this massive Greek empire. They had Greek culture and Greek philosophy and Greek sciences, and I mean, they learned Greek. So that was the language that they spoke. That was everything that was going. How did it happen that the Chanuka story kind of took off? So the history of it, we're not going to get into too many of the details of it, but we mentioned last week the Gam Chazus Arba Alu Limrema is that once Alexander the Great died, so he had the four generals that formed four armies that kind of split up his kingdom. Israel was caught in between the armies of the Seleucids and the Ptolemies. Ptolemies were basically Egypt, and the Seleucids were all the way through the Levant into Persia. And the Seleucids and the Ptolemies were fighting against each other for control of land and property. And Israel got caught in the middle. And like what always happens when Jews get caught in the middle between fights between, we end up the worst for it. But because of that, they become much more adamant. I mean, this happens over and over and over throughout history. For example, when the Rambam was 5 years old, there was an invasion of Almohads that came to attack the Spanish Umayyad Caliphate. Meaning they were both Muslims, Shiites versus Sunnis. Same machlokes that exists today. It's been going for a long time. Meaning then it was the Umayyads and the Almohads, and Spain was in Umayyad control, and the Almohads came into Spain and they conquered Spain from their Muslim brethren, and the Rambam was forced to flee because as a result of this whole thing, the Rambam and his family, they were forced to convert because everybody has to out-Muslim the other one, right? And the Greeks have to out-Greek each other, and the Christians in many times and places and spaces had to out-Christian each other. So like with the frummer you are, the more you have to kill Jews. So, right, meaning it's also property and it's power and it's and we can't believe that you guys would let these infidel scallywags, scumbuckets live amongst you. It now becomes a point of pride to say that we killed the Jews. So this happens in the days of the Hashmonaim as well. But understand that it would be Ke'ilu, and I just want to paint this picture for you for a moment. Imagine that America broke out in a civil war today between Republicans and Democrats. A couple months ago, that wasn't so far off. I think it seems to be that we're maybe past that tension for the moment, but who knows, right? But imagine that there was a civil war between Republicans and Democrats, and one side clearly was winning. Meaning, and yeah, there were Jews on different sides of the argument, but one side was like very clearly winning. Let's say in Florida, like, we'll say like what would be most likely the case.
The Texas,
that
Florida Republic.
I'm saying let's say that the Republicans won, have won the war in Florida. The war is still raging in other places, but in Florida they've won the war, and the Republicans that have won the war against the Democrats have said that we're shutting down all the shuls for the time being. We're shutting down all the shuls because there were Jews that were Democrats. We're in Palm Beach County. Palm Beach County voted blue, so we're shutting down all the shuls in South Florida, right? So what would we do as a community?
We go robbing over.
I'm saying, what would we do? What would we do as a community?
Same thing you did during COVID. You form little pockets.
Little pockets, right? Right? Little pockets, and then if they said, we're shutting down the shuls permanently, and all the shuls are going to become evangelical churches. We're taking over.
Going on planes to Israel.
So
Nefesh b'nefesh.
Nefesh b'nefesh, right?
And we can do that now, but obviously.
I'm saying, so what would we do?
No, it's all we would do. Israel would send a bunch of
But not
planes
everyone
in the
would.
middle of the night.
Today you have that option. Today, but understand that what I'm painting for you is a picture that sounds bizarre in America, but happened countless times in Jewish history.
It happens today, potentially a lot.
Correct. I'm saying, but that would be within the American context. Now, here's the crazy part, right? Is that we would all look at each other and be like, yeah, but like we're part of America. Like yeah, I'm sure this is going to be fine.
Because the economy didn't collapse yet.
Right.
The second that happens, we gotta get out of here.
I'm saying, but the economy's still going well. The Republican states of South Carolina, Georgia, Atlanta, Texas, Florida, right, have all created a new country called the Republic. The Republic, right? That's it. That's where we're holding right now, and because the evangelicals were the people that were very chazak about all of these things, they decided that they were going to shut all of the shuls and make them all into into evangelical churches. And we're going to shut down all the Jewish day schools. And so what would we do?
There would certainly be some transition of Jews going to the other side.
There would for sure be Jews going to the other side. And what would happen if they weren't allowed to go to the other side? They weren't allowed to, meaning the borders were shut, right? Yeah, no, we're not forcing you to convert. We're not forcing you to convert, but we are heavily...
It's illegal to practice Judaism?
Yeah. It slowly becomes illegal to practice Judaism.
You get out.
How? As soon as you can, right?
As soon as you smell that happening, you get
So understand, however, that at the beginning stages of this process, and this is the interesting thing.
This was happening in Israel.
Yes.
We have the mentality, let's get out and go to Israel. Like
Mhm.
they were in Israel. And that's what
Correct.
was happening,
It's more than that. Traditionally, you see, even in Germany, the Jews didn't run because they had their businesses,
There was
their
no
money,
Israel.
and
Yeah.
not everyone. There's still
Yeah, but
Jews
we
living in
watched
Germany
what
now.
happened in Germany, and now we know, like, if that was
People
happening
still
here,
make
we
the
gotta
same
go.
mistakes. They don't
Yeah,
know.
but
Look at the Jews in France. They should have been out a decade ago.
I'm saying the reason that I'm spinning it like this in particular is because right now Republicans are very pro-Jewish and very pro-Israel. But if it were to happen that there would be a war within a short space of time, you could see it going the other way. Meaning anything can flip on a dime. I mean, anything is possible. And depending on who would be whatever president candidate, whatever it might be at whatever point in time, they would outlaw the practice of Yiddishkeit. Now, here's the interesting thing: is at this point in time, if you're a Jew that isn't particularly religious, you see yourself primarily as an American, and you're a 2 or 3 day Jew. You come to shul from time to time. You're very proud about being Jewish, but like it doesn't take up a major part of your life. So 3 days a year, you think about your Yiddishkeit.
Or it's tradition. And that's it.
So
Lifestyle
okay,
Jews.
right? Meaning you can wait it out a year or two. We'll make the argument. People didn't go to shul for 2-3 years during COVID. I'm sure we'll wait this out. The people that fought the Greeks were Haredim. The Hashmonaim were Haredim. Let's just understand this. We're talking about the ultra-Orthodox, very frum people. I mean, Kohanim in the Beis Hamikdash that were anti-Hellenist b'shita. They were the people that didn't teach their kids math and English, that spoke exclusively in Yiddish, and
And they
when
signed up for the army?
and yeah,
Oh, wow.
And-
They created the army.
and they created an army where there wasn't one.
It's a good lesson.
Right?
It's a good lesson for today.
I'm saying these were the people that fought. The people that were on the sidelines kind of hedging it were okay, let's see how this plays out. And then there were people that were like, well, if they say that that's what we have to do in order to, they'll keep us safe from the other, and we should join them. Why not? The Judeo-Christians, it's not so bad. How much different is it from Judaism to Christianity? We might as well be evangelicals. How different is it? They also believe in the Old Testament. Why not? 3 day, yeah. Well, okay. So I'm sure. I happen to know a priest that is very traditional in his beliefs,
What did Jesus do that was so bad?
right? At the end of the day, he was a Jew. It's not so different. These are our values. It's more or less the same. Big deal. No, Beseder Gomer, right? They don't like our politics, but they don't really mind our religion. This is only a political thing. You could hear. I could practically write the blogs for you now, right? You understand? The people that went to war against the Greeks were Haredim. They had Bekishes and Stromels and Payas. Yehuda Maccabi was a religious fanatic.
Which is kind of ironic that for Hanukkah there's not that many halachos to do, just compared to all of our other holidays.
So we'll talk about it.
It's a pretty easy one. Make sure that you light the menorah.
Well, we'll talk about what the mitzvahs of Hanukkah are, because there are a few, and they're not all just simply contained within the mitzvah of Hadlakas Neres. The Allah Nisim is also the Takanos Chachamim, and we'll speak about that.
It's not a mitzvah. It's like all past like
Yeah. So we're going to talk about all of these things. It's a mitzvah. It is a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah. The Rambam writes B'divrei Sofrim, like Chris and Megillah. It has a status that is higher than Derabbanans, but less than Deraisas to a certain extent. But that notwithstanding, it's worth pointing out that the people that fought this war were not modern Orthodox. Like they were religious fanatics. These were the people that were insistent. They were not. Not to say that modern Orthodox people are wishy-washy. I'm saying like
imagine there were no modern Orthodox.
They were. They absolutely were. I mean, the point was.
People were learning Greek and stuff.
Yeah.
And speaking Greek.
Correct. That were intensely dedicated to Greek culture. They were still from Shabbos, Kashrus, Taras, Mishpacha, the whole thing. But like they when you saw them at a ball game / the Olympics, like they blended in with the crowd, right?
No, they had a baseball hat on.
Right.
And they looked like a Jew.
Right. The Pashtus is
with the matzah cream juice.
correct. Correct. They were sneaking in food under their strollers and saying they have allergies, right? Like kacha. But they were going to the same ball games. They were going to the same plays. They were learning the same language. They were professors in the same universities. Like they were part of the culture.
Blending into society.
And at the point in time that at the point in time that it crossed over into shutting down of religious institutions, namely the Beis Hamikdash, says the Rambam, "V'tzar lahem liYisrael ma'od mipneihem." They caused immense pain to the Jewish people. V'lachatzum lachatz gadol, and they pressed them immensely, meaning they put an enormous amount of pressure on the Jewish people. To do what? To not be Jewish, meaning to shut down all of the Jewish institutions, just become a vassal of the Greek Empire, shut it down.
How long was the time from? Like, what's the timeline here? Like,
Decades.
Like, how long was the Greek Empire controlling Jerusalem?
Decades. We're talking the Greek Empire. Chanuka happens around 146, 150 BC. But the wars of Chanuka, they were multiple. And they happened over decades. Meaning there were various iterations of it. And once they rededicated the Beis Hamikdash, the Greek armies were still there. They were still fighting. They had reconquered the Beis Hamikdash and the area around Yerushalayim, but like they were still going to war. This didn't stop. It wasn't like at the end of the story of Hanukkah, then it was like over. It was not over. At the end of the story of Purim, which was 13 years from the beginning of the Megillah until the end, people don't realize this because we read it kind of quickly. But from the beginning, from the Suda of Achashverosh until Haman gets hanged, is 13 years. It's a significant enough period of time for people to have babies and get married and have opinions. Like stuff happens. It's not just like, oh, I guess there's a Queen Esther's in the palace. I guess the Maccabees are fighting, right? A cappella music only, and that's how they won. There's wars that are going on, and it takes a long time. It's not something that happens overnight. There's like a generation and a half that goes by from the beginning of this to the end. It's not simple. Says the Rambam, Ad shirichem alehem Elokei Avosenu, until the God of our ancestors had mercy on them. V'hoshiem miadam, and saved them from their hands. Meaning there was rachmanus that came from racham Shemaim. Remember we pointed out last week the word rachamim. Ad shirichem alehem, that this required rachamim. This was something that required mercy. The midah of midas harachamim needed to be applied here. We don't see the same lashon being used in the story of Purim. We don't see the same lashon being used even in the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim. Right? We talk about Hashem remembered us. Here it is Ad shirichem alehem, until HaKadosh Baruch Hu had rachamim on us, v'hoshiem miadam, and saved us from their hands, v'itzilam, and saved us, v'itzilam, and provided salvation and savior. V'gavru b'nei Chashmonai ha'kohanim hagdolim, and the sons of the Chashmonaim, the Kohanim hagdolim, meaning Yochanan Kohen Gadol and his sons, overwhelmed the Greeks, v'hargum, and killed them, v'oshil yisol miyadam, and saved the Jewish people from their hands, ve'emidu melech min haKohanim, and then they established a king from the Kohanim, v'chazru malchus Yisrael yeser al masayim shana ad ha'churban hasheni, and royalty, sovereignty returned to the Jewish people for another 200 plus years, from like 150 BC until the destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash in 70 CE. It's like 220 years. Those 220 years were a disaster. Well, like basically, once the Greek armies had finally been vanquished, Rome shortly after took over, and fighting between the Bnei Chashmonaim ended up with the Romans taking over. We invited the Romans to, we're not so good at ruling. Why don't you guys help us? And that didn't work out very well. Meaning, Jews were fighting, and the Romans took over. And things got very bad for the last 150 plus years of the second Beis Hamikdash. Things were miserable. Everything okay?
Yeah, we forgot to give you a moment.
All right, so get us good, and then you can go get. Okay,
Got it.
no problem.
So does the fact that it required rachamim mean that we had sunk even lower, and that it was worse than even Yetzias Mitzrayim, where we were really at the bottom of the barrel?
Yeah, so it's a good question. Where does rachamim exist? What's the purpose of rachamim?
It's like a last-ditch effort.
Sort of, but not usually. We'll explain what rachamim means in a second, but the question is why we celebrate this Yom Tov at all, because everything that we did was undone, right? Meaning the rachmanus that Hashem had on us disappeared. Meaning that rachmanus apparently came to an end. No?
Or we did something to...
Meaning 200 years later, the Romans murdered the Sanhedrin and burnt the Beis Hamikdash. Like, what happened? Clearly this didn't work out so well. So the Shaila then exists. Like, okay, so what's the celebration? Says the Rambam, "Kshegavru Yisrael al oivem va'avdu mechamisha asa ve'eshem b'chodesh Kislev haya." When they finally conquered Harabait once again from the from the Greeks, nichnasu leheichal, they walked into the Beis Hamikdash. This was on the 25th day of the month of Kislev. V'lo matzu shem and tar b'mikdash. They couldn't find any shem and tar in the mikdash. They only found a pach shem echad. There was only one jar of oil, and they lit it and lost by 8 days, etc. And then mipnei zeh hiskinu chachamim sheba'osa adar. Because of this, the chachamim in that generation instituted shmeinas hayom ha'elu shetchila sam mei leil chamisha be'esem b'kislev yimei simcha v'hala. They instituted that these should be days of simcha and hala, which makes sense in that generation, right? Madlikin bahem hanerus ba'erev al pischa abatim b'chol laila v'laila and we light candles by the door of a house every night. Mishmanas Alelos leharis v'legalas hanes, in order to show and to demonstrate that there was a miracle that was done. What was the miracle?
We won the
Seven.
war 7-1, War 7.
So there's two parts of this. One part of it is that we won the war. If you were a Jew in the days of Chanuka, what part of the story are you more excited about? The oil or the war?
The war.
The war, for sure, right?
Some Spartan stuff going down.
Right. And in fact, that is what we talk about in Al-Anisim. Rabim biyad ma'atim, tmeim biyad tarim, rishayim biyad tzadikim, right? Meaning that we won the war. That is very clearly the lion's share of the celebration. And yet the mitzvah, interestingly enough, meaning our celebration of this, is contained within the lighting of the menorah, which is a little bit strange, right? Meaning,
every Yontif has a symbol of some sort. Pesach has matzah, and Sukkot has a lulav and esrog, and Purim has mishloach manos.
Purim has, what does Purim have? What was the miracle of Purim then?
Well, it didn't have anything.
It didn't.
Mishloach manos.
Well, wine, no. That was the whole thing. He
Okay.
thought you, Esther,
It's a lot of
Sure.
things.
But
Haman thought he was, Achashverosh thought he was drunk and
okay. So
Esther,
we have
the
we
wine-
have things that are zecher l'nes, sure. And by the way, we have many things on Hanukkah. We have things that are zecher to, but it's interesting that in the mitzvah itself, there's no zecher to the military victory.
Wait, you said the war wasn't over.
It wasn't over, but
the immediate war was over.
No, but we won the Beis Hamikdash back.
and therefore,
that was a victory.
correct.
And then we lit the menorah, and then the miracle was that they were like, they couldn't fully tame us. Like, we still had some summer left, and that was able to expand.
And therefore,
I'm saying that's meaningful.
so
Maybe we didn't fully win.
we very much did. We beat the Greeks. It's finished. The point is this, and this is important to understand. The Chachamim in that generation understood this well. There is a deep connection that needs to be understood here between the military victory and the miracle of the oil, and it's not obvious. Meaning, there are two things that happened here. There's a military victory, which is, if you're living at that point in time, that is much more significant. And the miracle of the oil, who even saw it?
Only the people inside.
Kohanim.
Only the people inside.
Handful of people. A handful of people saw
It
it.
also came after the military victory.
Correct.
They would have been in.
Correct.
That's something they should be in with.
So there's two things that are going on here, and they're not obvious. I mean, I'll give you an example. Yetzias Mitzrayim had many miracles, lots of miracles, right? They all very much related to each other. Meaning, the 10 Makkos were all a breakdown of the Egyptian society, economy, capacity to have Jewish slaves. Like, that's what the Makkos did. They destroyed our oppressors. The splitting of the sea drowned the Egyptians. Meaning all connected, all part of a tahalich, all part of a process, a program, that all connected to each other. The miracles of the desert, miracles that occurred throughout the desert, man from Shemaim and water from a rock, and Ananei covered, like the nisim that happened in the Midbar, like, and we have zecher to these things, right? We have Sukkot reminding us of the Ananei covered. Like we have miracles and we have commemorations of those miracles to a certain extent, but they all seem to connect to each other. The military victory and the miracle of the oil seem to be disconnected from each other. And I'll make it worse for you. Strictly speaking, this is a big shaila halacha, but some of you have probably come up to these concepts learning Daf Yomi and in a few different mesechtas. This comes up in Yavamas, and it comes up in Psachim, and it comes up in Yuma. There's a concept called Tumahutra Betzibur. Comes up in Psachim, for example. If the majority of the Jewish people on Erev Pesach are all Tamei Meis, majority of the Jewish people are Tamei Meis, do they bring Korban Pesach? Yes or no?
We have Pesach Sheni for that.
That's if the minority is Tamei Meis. But if the majority of the Jewish people is Tamei Meis, they've all come in contact with their body. I mean, they're all into war, and they're whatever it might be. So we have a principle called Tuma Hutra Betzibur, that if the community is Tamei, so then Tuma is suspended. The halachas of Tuma are suspended. All the Kohanim were probably Tamei Meis. All of the oil was Tamei, maybe Tamei Meis, Tamei Sheretz, Tamei something. Most likely, according to the vast majority of Rishonim, there's work to be done in different directions on this la halacha, but they could have used any oil. It didn't have to be tahar. Tumah Hudra B'tzibur. I mean, if everything is tamei and everyone is tamei, so then
Nothing is that way.
then it's tamei, but it's mutter. It's mutter. Tumah Hudra B'tzibur. The Rambam passes la halacha. You see this in Moreh Nevuchim. You see this in a number of places that he writes this in Yisrael Torah that all of the miracles that Hashem did for us in the Midbar and Yetzias Mitzrayim were all functional. It's machlokes probably the Rambam and the Ramban with regards to Yetzias Mitzrayim, and we've learned that Ramban a few times. The Ramban in the Parshas Bay that all of the makos were there to teach a theological lesson. The Rambam writes. It's worth knowing this inside. The Rambam writes this in Hilchos Yisrael Torah, in the 8th parak. The Rambam says, "Moshe Rabbeinu lo ye'aminu ba'Yisrael mipnei ha'osa she'asa." Moshe Rabbeinu was not believed because of the miracles that he did. And this is the Rambam's not so well veiled polemic against Christianity that he writes beferish. He says, "Shehamamin al pi ha'osas." Somebody that believes because of miracles, yesh beliboy daifi, is an idiot. If your belief is based on miracles, you're a moron. Why? Because anybody can pull off a trick. Meaning that somebody's a talented illusionist. If you believe in things because of miracles, you're an idiot. So you might want to say that the Rambam works with the Ramban, that Yetzias Mitzrayim, that the makos were to demonstrate Hashem's power to Paro, meaning it was demonstrative, but it wasn't for the sake of creating emunah. The Ramban seems to understand that the makos and Yetzias Mitzrayim, and the reason that everything is Eichel Yetzias Mitzrayim is to be mashrish that emunah, in order to re-emphasize the emunah in everything that we understood from Yetzias Mitzrayim. But the Rambam writes differently. He says, why do we believe that what Moshe Rabbeinu said was true? Why do we believe the guy?
What choice do we have?
What do you mean, what choice do we have? Ram is a rationalist. Why does he trust this fellow called Moses? Why does he trust him? Why did any Jew at that point in time trust Moshe Rabbeinu?
Everything he said basically followed through.
Okay, sure.
Why would you not trust him?
Because miracle working is cheap tricks.
He was also a leader, aside from.
Okay. Why do we believe him?
Not everyone did.
No, but I'm saying,
He connected to Hashem.
and therefore, how do we know that he connected to Hashem? How do we know that he wasn't just making it up?
He's a con man.
How do we know that he wasn't just a con man?
And how you believe in anything.
Yeah, correct. Good question, right?
He was 8 foot tall and had a staff
Yeah.
and a radiant face.
Chose
Says the Rambam, I'll tell you exactly why. He says,
Because he needed to.
He says, firstly, Ela kol ha'oseh she'asa Moshe b'midbar lefi ha'tzarech hasan. All the miracles that Moshe did in the desert were necessary. That's the first thing to note. They weren't cheap tricks. They weren't for the sake of convincing you to believe in him. They were all functional. Lo lahavi raya al nevuah, not to prove that he was a bona fide prophet. Meaning, it wasn't to prove anything. Moshe Rabbeinu never proved anything through miracles. He says, "Tzarich la'ashkia es ha'mitzrim." You need to drown the Egyptians. Karas hayam v'tzilon ba. He split the sea and he drowned them. Tzarchen l'masum. We needed food. Hari lanu aman. He brought down the man. Tzamu. We were thirsty. Baka lohem es ha'ev, and he brought water from the rock. Right. Kafru bayadas Korach. Korach came along and started a coup. Bala isam ha'aretz. He made the ground swallow them up. Meaning these were functional, utilitarian miracle work, not for the sake of emunah. It says v'chein shar kol ha'osos, and the same is true about all of the miracles. So why do we believe in him? So the Rambam points this out. Where is Sefer Shmos? Here we go. Here's the Bible. Here's the pasuk. Here's the pasuk at the end. At the end of Moshe Rabbeinu has this conversation with Hashem towards the end of Parshat Shmos, where he's standing at the burning bush, and Hashem says to him, I want you to go and get the Jews out of Egypt, right? I want you to get these my people. Tell them that I've heard them, and he says to them as follows: Vayan Moshe vayomer. Moshe says, "Vehein lo ya'aminu li, v'lo yishmu b'koli." They will not believe me, and they will not listen to my voice. Ki yomru lo nira elecha Hashem, that Hashem didn't appear to you. Meaning Moshe Rabbeinu is concerned that they will not trust him. Vayomer elav Hashem, and Hashem says to him, "Maza biyadcha? What's in your hand?" Vayomer mateh. He says, "I have a stick." Vayomer shlicheu arza. Right? He says, "Throw it onto the ground. Throw it to the ground." And he throws it to the ground and turns into a snake. Vayomer Hashem Moshe shlach yadcha. He'll pick it up, and he picks it up fine, and it turns back into a. So he says, L'man yaminu, so that they would believe. Ki nir'a elecha Hashem elokei avosam, that Hashem, the God of their ancestors, appeared to them. Elokei Abraham, elokei Yitzchak, elokei Yaakov, the God of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Fine. So vayomer lo'od, and then he says to him, stick the hand in your thing, and pulls it out. And if they don't believe the first sign, they'll believe the second sign. Ve'hayayim lo yaminu gam lishnei l'sos. What happens if they don't believe these first two signs? Take the water from the thing and pour it, and you'll see that it's going to turn into blood. And then Moshe Rabbeinu says that I'm not good at speaking, and he says, "Fine, send with Aaron." And then Hashem gets upset with Moshe, and he says, "Aaron, I know that he can speak. He's going to come fine." Moshe Rabbeinu is very, very upset that he is going to be displaying these signs and wonders. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu already preempted all of this. And he says to him, you're 100% right, Moshe, you're right. If they believe in you because of these signs and wonders, the Sadar Rambam understands this whole sugya, the whole parsha, the conversation back and forth between Hashem and Moshe Rabbeinu. Says the Rambam, Moshe Rabbeinu is saying, I don't want to present them with emunah that's cheap tricks. Hashem says, when you take them out of Mitzrayim, they will serve Hashem on this mountain. What does that mean? So now you come back to the Mishnah Torah. What is the reason that we believe in HaKadosh Baruch Hu and we trust Moshe Rabbeinu? How do we believe in Moshe? How do we trust him that he's accurate? B'mamad Har Sinai. What happened at Sinai? She'einenu ra'u v'lo zar. Our eyes saw, and no stranger. It wasn't somebody else. It wasn't second hand. Ve'oznenu shama v'lo acher. and our ears heard, not somebody else's. What do we hear and what do we see? Ha'esh va'akalas va'alapid. The fire and the thunder and the flames and the lightning.
They still have to trust him before all this happened.
So they trusted him with a lower level of trust.
Well, they're also slaves then, and then they were free people. So,
So-
And he freed them.
So what happens at Matan Torah? HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, "V'gam b'cha yaminu le'olam." At Matan Torah, they will finally believe you. I mean, they'll eventually believe you, and we see that this happens in 3 iterations. There's a belief that happens in Mitzrayim. There's a belief that happens after Kriyas Yamsuf. V'yaminu b'Hashem Moshe Avda. They finally trusted Moshe. What do you mean they trusted Moshe? Meaning, it wasn't just cheap tricks. They saw Zekir Livyan Veu. And then at Matan Torah, the way the Meshech Chochmah explains this is that at Matan Torah, everybody had prophecy enough to appreciate the prophecy that Moshe Rabbeinu had. Meaning they didn't have the same level of prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu, but they had enough prophecy to appreciate that he was way more. This is, I think I told this Moshe once before, that this is not Moshe, it's a true story, apparently, that there was like, once Dr. Einstein was already a well-regarded professor, and won awards and was proclaimed and acclaimed around the world. So he was at some big convention, and a little boy comes up to him, and his father says to him, "This is Herr Einstein," and he says to him, "Shalom Aleichem." Einstein, no. So he says to him, "Little boy, what are you studying?" He says, "I'm in I'm 3rd grade." He says, "5th grade, whatever it might be." And he says, "Professor Einstein, like what are you studying?" So he says, "My whole life I've been studying physics." And the little boy goes, "Yeah, that's so funny because we finished physics last year." Right? Meaning there's an understanding of physics which is like, I think it's finished. We finished physics. And then there's an understanding of physics where you can appreciate that Einstein knows a lot more physics than you. Right? There's like enough knowledge to know how much somebody else knows. Says the Meshech Chochmah, that's what we gained at Matan Torah.
So how did we lose it so quickly with the Chayt Be'egel?
That's a separate question, not for now. It's a good question, but no. We'll do that another day. Remind me. Remind me. Pasha says, and this is the kasha, because we have to get back to Chanuka here. The kasha is, what was the functional purpose of the miracle of the oil?
A whole week of wait.
Azma.
It lasts longer than just a memory. It's physical.
Reminds you of what happened at Matan Torah.
I'm saying,
Kolos Bruckin, the whole.
what was the functional purpose of it? For the Rambam, miracles are functional.
Until they could make new oil.
Azma.
No.
What?
Who cares? Arguably,
They can do the services.
They
Yeah.
didn't need to use the pure oil.
arguably, they did not need pure oil. According to a significant school of thought amongst the Rishonim, according to they didn't need pure oil. What? That's not called a functional miracle.
That
The
only
fact that we're lighting the
started-
menorah, which was never not burning until.
Okay, so we don't. By the way, we don't see that immediately they restored the Ketores, and that immediately they restored the Lechem Apanim. That probably all took time. And we have a principle in halacha. Let's say even that they didn't have any pure oil, that nothing was found. All of these things, nothing worked.
Question. Who cares?
Takes time.
Right,
Who cares?
Seems like the most minor thing relative to winning.
100%. Right, winning the war was the thing. What's the deal with the oil?
Because light expires.
Whee!
Fluffy nonsense. Okay, just give us the answer. Shooting in the dark here.
Let's understand that something has fundamentally changed. Something has fundamentally changed in the world. And I want to point this out in its historical context, because this question has existed since the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash. And the question is Hashem done with us? Is it over? Meaning, if you were a Jew that came out of Egypt, right? What's the goal? Is to get to Eretz Yisrael. So let's say you messed up in the Midbar. Sure. So you're part of the generation of people that dies in the desert. No problem. I didn't make it to Eretz Yisrael, but my son will make it to Eretz Yisrael. And he conquers the land with Yeshua. And then there's some rough days between Yeshua and Shoftim. There's like 300 years of infighting and civil war and unrest and Plishtim coming and conquering things and things not working out well. And then they have the Mishkan in Shiloh, which is some days going well and other days going less well. Until finally the kingdom is unified under Shaul HaMelech, and then that fails. And then it's unified under David HaMelech, and he's going to build the Beis HaMikdash, and then he dies at that building. And then Shlomo HaMelech comes along and builds the Beis HaMikdash. And if you live in the days of Shlomo HaMelech, you are living in the days of Mashiach ben David. Quite literally, he is the anointed one, the son of David. The OG. Mashiach ben David. The first, right? And then there's civil war and unrest, and the kingdom splits, and there's a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom. And then the Assyrians come and they conquer the 10 northern kingdoms some 300 years later. But you're there for the Beis HaMikdash. And things have gone well sometimes and poorly a lot of the time. But at the end of the day, you're Jewish, and you have a Beis HaMikdash. And let's say you're living in the days of Chizkiyahu, and the 10 northern kingdoms have been exiled by the Assyrians, and the Assyrians are surrounding Yerushalayim. And Chizkiyahu davens, and they wake up the next morning, and the whole Assyrian camp is dead. And Baruch Hashem, miracle of miracles, and Beis HaMikdash resumes, and everything is great. And the Nevi'im come along. You have Yirmiyahu, and Yoshiyahu, and Yechezkel, and Nechevra. Things are going poorly. If you don't stop worshipping Avodah Zarah, they're going to destroy the Beis HaMikdash. It's going to be destroyed. It's going to be destroyed. Mitzvah and Bara, they're going to come from the north. They're going to destroy Yerushalayim. And you look at this, you go, nah. We've been through worse. Things have gone up and things have gone down, and we understand the 10 northern kingdoms for 300 years. It's not so bad here. We've got schools and shuls and mikvahs and erevs, and people are more or less, Shema Torah mitzvahs, and it's got. I mean, we're not going to deny the fact that like things have not always been so pretty, but until Hara of Hara and Tisha B'Av, the Beis HaMikdash is destroyed. Burnt, sacked, ransacked, destroyed. Malka v'sareh b'goyim ein Torah. The pasuk in Ech. Malka v'sareh b'goyim. That the kings and officers are all in exile in Torah. There's no more Torah. Meaning, if you're a Jew living through Churban Bayis Rishon, that entire arc of history has now come to an end. It's over. All of the dreams, all of the yearnings, all of the... Remember, there are still prophets that are alive that have been warning about these things and are now crying over it. It's not like there's no Talmid Chachamim, that there's no tzaddikim. There's tzaddikim, big tzaddikim. It's not like they're on kings. Yechonia, Melech Yehuda, and he's taken in shackles and chains and taken to Babylon. And the Nevi'im are being slaughtered, and the Sanhedrin is decimated. And this is Tisha B'Av. Like that's the story. And they enter into Babylonian exile, imagining that the same thing that happened to the 10 tribes is happening to them. It's over, done. Like this whole experiment called Yiddishkeit is now finished. And then the question is, well, who are we and what do we do now? And then there's the 70-year period of Anshe Knesset Agdola, which, please God, next week we'll for bring Chanuka, we'll talk about what the Anshe Knesset Agdola did and who they were and what this has to do with Chanuka. But somehow or another, through the story, there was, according to most of the Rishonim, this is when the Purim story occurs. Once the Babylonians are taken over by the Persians. Somehow or another, the Beis Hamikdash kind of gets rebuilt. And we spoke about this last week, and we've spoken about before that the second Beis Hamikdash was limping from the get-go. 90% of the Jewish people are still in Babel. The second Beis Hamikdash is a shadow of its former self. When they built the second Beis Hamikdash, the Psukim in Nehemiah describe that those that remembered the first Beis Hamikdash sat on the floor crying their eyes out, and those that were younger than the age of 70 were celebrating, singing and dancing, because look at that, we made it to the Beis Hamikdash. It says the pasuk in Nehemiah that the crying was louder than the rejoicing. There were many more old poor Jews that came back yearning for a yesteryear that was not there. Wasn't there? It's like the Beis Hamikdash burnt down and they put up a new one, and it was nothing like the former. Nothing like it. And they cried. Like it was over. And they prayed and they hoped and they pleaded that somehow or another this Beis Hamikdash will be the Geula Shalem. That they weren't waiting for the third Beis Hamikdash. They were waiting for the second. Right? The rebuilding of the Beis Hamikdash. The restoration of Jewish sovereignty to the land of Israel. The reinstating of Malchus Beis David. Back to its former glory. Right? That was the story. And for the first 80 years or so, it looked like you had a chance. Until corruption sets in, and this the Gemara in Yoma discusses, that the Kohanim Gedolim became corrupt, and they were buying it from each other, and it became a political office, and the vast majority of Jews were still in Babylon. The second Beis Hamikdash never got off the ground. Now, if you're a Babylonian at that point in time, you're a Babylonian, you're not Jewish. As far as you're concerned, the age of Jewish sovereignty is over. The age of Malchus Yisrael is finished. We destroyed their temple. And Chazal pointed out at the beginning of Maseches Megillah that there was a prophecy, they knew of this prophecy that the second Beis Hamikdash would be rebuilt, that there would be a return after 70 years. Why does Achashverosh make his party when he makes it?
Oh, because he calculated it that the 7 years were over, so
It's over. It's over. Meaning Malchus Yisrael is never coming back.
They included a king.
Everybody miscounted it.
Yeah.
Everybody. Nebuchadnezzar counted it wrong. Achashverosh counted it wrong. The Nebuchadnezzar Gadol counted it wrong. Daniel counted it. Everybody counted it wrong. But Achashverosh makes his party because according to his calculations, it's over. Which means that the Jews are never going back. Which means that the age of the Jewish empire is finished. Now it's the Persian generation.
Why was that so important to all these nations, though? They're clearly larger and more powerful.
For the same reason that it's very clear that today America is the world superpower. But it worries America tremendously that Russia is as strong as it is. Right? That's worrisome. It's worrisome that China is as powerful as China is. It's worrisome that North Korea has nuclear weapons. It's worrisome. Meaning it's true. That's not changing the American way of life right now. But there would be a lot less international pressure cooking if China and Russia didn't have nuclear weapons. If North Korea didn't have nuclear weapons, everybody would be a little more chill. Right?
Right.
Achashverosh knows, right now I'm the superpower. But I know that these Jews have aspirations. And if their prophecy is over, and they are all part of my kingdom, then I don't have a problem with Jews being Jews. Welcome to be Jews. Just don't be a Jewish nation. Don't threaten my sovereignty.
Were the Jews at that time, like the Israel, like such a culturally significant, like everyone knew Torah and all this other stuff at that point?
There were those that did and those that didn't.
Like people knew of it. And
Yes.
culturally,
Look,
Jews up.
it's very clear that when Haman sends out his decree that there is a nation that is not like all the other nations, and meaning they sent it out to 127 different provinces, and apparently all of them had Jews, right? And all of them knew who the Jews were. Jews, right? They knew them. They're not like us. Them Jews, like I mean, they knew who they were, right? It's not.
They also know history because
They knew.
obviously the Jews as slaves defeated the superpower. That
Correct.
It could happen.
It could happen, and these things could happen again. If you are a Babylonian at that point in time, you are very excited that the Jewish Empire has not been resurrected. If you're a Persian, you're very excited about it. And when the Greeks conquer the Persians and then break into the different four kingdoms, you are very, very excited that it's great. The Jews have their temple, it's great. But sovereignty and security and an army and a currency and a language and a culture and a religion that threatens the Greek Empire. We don't want competing ideologies, competing malchus. We spoke about the idea of malchus a few weeks ago, right? Meaning you're welcome to have a different religion. Don't have a different malchus. Meaning you want to practice your thing, you can practice your thing. We've got lots of gods, you can have yours. But that you're going to threaten not just our religion and culture, but you're going to threaten our not even sovereignty, but the way that we look at the world. You Jews, it's a different way of understanding the world, and that's dangerous to us.
And I think that's what they thought was over, right?
Yes,
That.
the Jewish way of looking at the world was finished, which meant, and this is the important part of this, which means that Hashem was finished with us.
We thought so.
But that's what they felt.
Until the menorah lasted 7 more days.
So hold up on that thought for a moment. Because Hashem made a promise to the Jewish people once upon a time. When we came out of Egypt, and we were on that very, very high height, Matan Torah, and then 40 days later, Moshe Rabbeinu came down and he smashed the luchos, and Shivas of Thomas happened. And Moshe Rabbeinu went back up the mountain and he petitioned that Hashem should save us. Hashem reveals to Moshe Rabbeinu something interesting. What does he reveal to him? Yud Gimel Midos Harachamim. The 13 principles of Rachamim. Now, Yudi, you asked the question, does Rachamim mean a last-ditch effort? What do you think? We said in Rosh Hashanah that Hashem should have Rachamim on us, Kerachem Av al Banim. Like a father has Rachamim on his son. What does Rachamim mean?
It's the balance between chesed and gvura.
Okay, what does it mean?
It
Means
means
that even if they're not right, you're still going to look the other way and accept them because you're not throwing out your own child.
No, that's chesed.
it's the balance of giving and restriction,
Where's the restriction?
because there needs to be some level of like it's despite that the bad, I'm doing the good.
That's called chesed. What's the difference between chesed and rachamim?
Chesed is someone that you may have something to do with or may not have
Rachamim,
anything to do with,
you
but
did
you have
bad,
a connection to your own child.
Okay, and therefore,
You're
What's the
always you're never going to say you're not my child anymore.
okay, and therefore,
You're going to forgive them and let them continue.
that's chesed. That's ava.
I don't know. Is it chesed?
Yeah, for sure. That's ava. You meaning you're about chesed. You just see the good in people. So I'll tell you the nakuda here, and this is important to understand. Rachamim doesn't mean chesed. Rachamim doesn't mean loving people and being kind to people. Rachamim means zooming out to see the big picture. The reason that you love your child is not just because they're your child. The reason that you love your child is because you don't look at the thing that's happening now. You look at the thing that's happening bigadol. You look at the big picture. Chesed is narrow focused. It's this activity right now. Am I being kind to you right now? Gvura is narrow focused. It is, am I being strict with you right now? Both of those things are important at different points in time. Rachamim means I'm not looking at the right now, I'm looking at the big picture. And that big picture perspective is going to impact and influence the thing that I'm about to do. It's a different perspective. It's a zoomed out perspective. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu reveals to Moshe Rabbeinu on Har Sinai, right? The third time up, according to Rashi. And he comes down on Yom Kippur and teaches us the Yud Gimel Midas HaRachamim, the 13 principles of Rachamim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu makes a covenantal relationship with the Jewish people that Ki lo yicholu rachamav, that his rachamim is never going to end. Meaning that the big picture is that he will always look after the Jewish people. And that came under heavy, heavy threat. It was that was questioned when the Babylonians destroyed the first Beis HaMikdash. And it was that which, once we had built the second Beis HaMikdash, the Persians and then the Greeks taunted us about. It's great, you can have your temple, but you are no longer the chosen people. God has rejected you. How do you know that God has rejected you? Because you might have a land and you might have a temple, but it's on our cheshbon. We gave that to you. And we can take it away from you. And we can shut it down when we want to shut it down. Because you might have your religion, but you don't have your malchus. Because Malchus Yisrael is gone. The age of Jewish supremacy, the age of Jewish sovereignty is finished. You are no longer the chosen kingdom. You are no longer the apple of God's eye. The seat of Malchus has moved from Jerusalem to Babylonia, from Babylonia to Persia, from Persia to Athens. Which means that the rachamim that Hashem has to say that the Jewish people will always be his people is finished. This argument comes up over and over and over and over and over again throughout the Middle Ages, because this was the primary argument that the Christians had against the Jews. God has abandoned you and chosen us. Says the Rambam, Ad shirichem aleihem Elokei avoseinu, until Hashem had rachamim on them. That the Greeks were oppressing us and destroying us until Rachamei Shamayim was revealed again. Until that big picture perspective was revealed once again. Now, that big picture perspective meant that we won the war and we rededicated the Beis HaMikdash. But the age of prophecy is over. No more prophets. And at the end of the day, the Greek culture is still the most popular culture in the world. And the Romans are just behind the curtain. They're waiting to come out and destroy the Greeks and destroy the Beis HaMikdash 200 years later and send us all into exile for a long time to come. The nace of Ner Chanuka was the most functional of all mitzvahs, of all miracles that could have occurred at that point in time. Because it was a throwback to the years of miracles. The purpose of this miracle was to say, don't worry, HaKadosh Baruch Hu hasn't forgotten you. In a world that was antithetical to miracles, prophecy was over. It was today. The miracle of the oil was that HaKadosh Baruch Hu peeking out from behind the scenes going, psst, you like that? See what I did there? Pretty cool, right? We still got this. which is why the Nes of Hanukkah is the one that lasts until Mashiach. Yeah,
That's what's happening now. How are we going to celebrate what's happening now in the future?
we'll see.
We'll see.
We'll see. I'm saying we'll see how this is. The Chachamim in those generations, they were kaveh that, but even the miracles that are happening now, nobody's denying that these are. I mean, there are those that are, but whatever. I would say nobody's denying that there's amazing miracles that are happening now. But it's still possible to say this is brilliance and this is natural and
Technology.
Right?
whatever you wanna say.
you know, the Mossad and Israeli ingenuity and amazing intelligence and etc. Blah blah blah.
Iron beams,
Right,
Jewish space lasers.
right. That's the nace of Ner Chanukah was Hakadosh Baruch Hu whispering to the Jewish people was very very small. Was Chavra. All of those things that happened in Yitzhak Mitzrayim, it's still there. In all of this, it's still there. And things are going to go up and things are going to go down, but I want you to know that that's still real. And that's why the entirety of Hanukkah is simply Ad Sherichim Aleichem Elokei Avoseinu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu revealed his rachamim once again. Now, I'll leave you with the halacha that we didn't discuss. Because the Mishnah tells us in Maseches Tamid, I think, that in the days of the second Beis HaMikdash, one of the takanas of the Beis Din of the Chashmonaim, sorry, Maseches Midos, that one of the takanas of the Beis Din of the Chashmonaim, and you'll begin to understand this now, and there's a lot more to explain. We'll explain, please God, next week. When the Greeks entered, they broke, Pirtsu by Piratzos, they broke 13 different gaps. What did they break in the Beis HaMikdash? So there was an area in the Beis HaMikdash called the Chel. It was a separating wall called the Chel. The Chel separated between the area that non-Jews could not go further and the areas that Jews could go further. And the Greeks, when they came into the Beis HaMikdash, they shattered that wall because that was their whole kunst, that was their whole time. You're not special. We're the new chosen people. So the separation wall that bordered off where non-Jews could go up to here and no further, they shattered it in 13 places. Why 13? Because the Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim are over. And when they rededicated the Beis HaMikdash, they filled in the gaps of those 13 places. And they were misakin that each time that you walk past one of those places, you mishtachava, you bow down. Meaning that you acknowledge the fact that there is rachamim, that we are here because of rachamim. That was one of the instituted mitzvahs of the Beis Din of the Chashmonaim. Lighting Neres Chanukah and acknowledging the rachamim. Now, I'll give you a few pieces more to consider here. Is we say Ala Nisim B'dafka in Modim, where we bow. That's the entire institution of it. Modim, which is about acknowledgement and gratitude, is in the midah of Hoid. Chesed Gvur Tiferes Netzach Hoid. Hoid, which is the midah of Aaron HaKohen, which is Al Yidei Kahanecha HaKadoshim, that the whole thing happened through the Kahanim. We haven't discussed why that has to happen, but it has to be like that. It could only have come through the Kahanim, and that's why they were the ones that understood that they needed to go to war. This was the redemption of Midas HaHoid, the redemption of Aaron HaKohen, the world of Kahuna, was the thing that was restored at this point in time. But the ikar here, to understand, is that when we end this in the Moedim, Hatov ki lo chalu rachamecha v'amrachim ki lo yisamu chasadecha me'lam kibin lach. Hatov ki lo chalu rachamecha v'al hanisim v'al apurkan v'al gurs. Because the whole of the Chanukah story was a reintroduction to the idea of rachamei shemayim. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu still has rachamim on the Jewish people, means we are still the chosen nation. That covenant has not been broken and will never be broken. That's the real story of Hanukkah. That's the celebration. That is why even after the second Beis Hamikdash is destroyed, the Rachamim Shemaim is not destroyed. Because the miracle was independent of the war. It was, if you will, gratuitous miracling. That was the point. It was non-functional. It needed to not be functional. Because if it was for a purpose, then that purpose could have been destroyed. But dafka, it had to be something that you didn't need. You didn't need it to be like that. It's like HaKadosh Baruch Hu telling you something. And the thing that he's telling you is, I haven't forgotten about you. The age of Jewish sovereignty and supremacy and royalty is not over. You just have to work back to it. We're getting there.
And how do you anoint a king? With oil?
That's the Shemra Mishra. Now, we have a lot more to speak about. There's the idea of kahuna and where that oil came from and who was the Kohen Gadol, and there's a billion other pieces here. But that's enough for now. Just understand that that's what we're talking about, which is the zero, which we didn't even get a chance to reopen this week. That it's Chas Hashem ki lo ysamnu ki lecholu rachamav al yidei rechumav. It has to be the midas harachamim. That's the thing that's coming in. That's what the Rambam is pointing out. That it's all being in midas harachamim, Be'ez Hashem Yisbarach, to be continued next week.
When HaKadosh Baruch Hu revealed the Shlosh Esrei Midos,
Yeah.
Midos Rachman to Moshe Rabbeinu, was that post when he threatened to wipe out the Bnei Yisrael?
Yes.
So, okay.
And after Moshe Rabbeinu petitions.